So the receiver class in the draft isn't very good. Could this end up like the 2020 draft for the Packers, where they just don't get anybody?
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode, you guys, we're going to talk about the receiver position. Some of you accuse me of being a little receiver crazy. I understand that. But I also know that a lot of you are out there going, they need a receiver. And as I was looking at the Go Long profile that they do every year, Bob McGinn, no one is better at getting the skinny from scouts. It's a bad class. Or look, the NFL thinks it's a bad class. And it's to the point where Bob McGinn is comparing it to really bad drafts of yesteryear, 2008, 1990. It's not very good. According to one AFC executive in here, there's maybe 3 or 4 top guys. There's a lot of day 3 meat. It's not very top heavy. So when you look at this group, I am wondering if for the Packers, this ends up being the kind of thing where, like in 2020, they either get that guy at 23 or they trade back a bit and pick up that guy. Or maybe they trade up a bit and get that guy. Or they just decide, as you may recall, Brian Gutekunst said after the 2020 draft, they didn't feel like the players that they could draft on day 3 would move the needle, or maybe even on day 2, in their receiver room. Now, I was on record at the time saying that's nonsense because you just never know with draft picks. Take the opportunity. But clearly, one never presented itself with a player that they liked. Now, it's harder to swallow that explanation when the players that they did draft were guys like Kamal Martin and Josiah DeGuara. You probably could have found a receiver in there somewhere to come in and just compete and maybe do something for you. Maybe pop. You never know. So that's problematic. But then you look at this and you go, okay, well, Jaden Higgins, according to this scouting survey, has him in the 2nd to 3rd round range. If he's there at 54, you're getting a really good player, a really clean prospect. They have Isaiah Bond, according to these scouts, in the 2nd round. Ugh. There's 8 receivers in the top 2 with top 2 round grades, according to this scouting survey. Jalen Royals is 9th, and he's the first guy in the 3rd round for them. There are years where, like, we thought we might get 9 first-round receivers. Not really, but we might get like 5 or 6. 9 would go in the top 50 or the top 40. That's not this draft class. So I'm wondering, is this the kind of thing where they may say, look, if we don't get one at the top of the draft, we're going to be good. And maybe on day 3, you get a Dante Thornton from Tennessee who runs really, really fast. But you look at this group, like they have 12 players here with top 100 type grades. And then you're talking about someone like Alec Ayumanor, who is a 4.42 guy at 6'1.5", 207. If you could get him in round 4, well, then you're going, okay, well, if the difference between that guy and the guy you're going to get in the 3rd round is not that much, then you'd rather have the 3rd round corner or the 3rd round tackle who could play guard or the 3rd round corner or whatever. Now, is there someone that they would break their long-standing tradition for? I've talked about this, Jaden Higgins being that guy. But I went back and looked because, I had a back and forth with our friend Wendell Fajeda from A to Z about Matthew Golden. 5'11", 190 and change, ran really fast, but never was super productive, never was the engine of the offense at Texas in the passing game. And so I went back and looked. And I went back and looked at a metric that, longtime listeners of the show know that I like when it comes to receivers, and that is the Dominator rating. It is a composite metric that looks at things like target share, first down share, touchdown share, basically how much of the offense, the valuable parts of the offense, are you creating? Now go back and look. Every outside receiver that the Packers have drafted in the Ted Thompson, Brian Gutekunst era has been 84th percentile or better in Dominator. They love highly, highly, highly productive receivers. For as much as we complain, well, I don't, but some people do, about the productivity versus athleticism issue with pass rushers, the Packers prize productivity. Greg Jennings, 98th percentile. James Jones, 90th percentile. Jordy Nelson, 96th percentile. Devonte Adams, 84th percentile. Christian Watson, 90th percentile. The non-boundary receivers. Now you look at Ty Montgomery was 29th percentile, but Ty Montgomery was, even when they drafted him, it was like, okay, he's a kick returner. He can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. He was kind of drafted in the third round to be a gadget type player. Amari Rodgers, same deal, 33rd percentile. He was a slot receiver. Randall Cobb, 48th percentile. He was a slot receiver. Jaden Reed, 72nd percentile. He was a slot receiver. So in this draft class, who are the guys who were that kind of productive? The only guy is Tet McMillan from Arizona, who is seen as a top 15, top 20 kind of pick. The Packers would probably have to trade up to get him. Now, there are some other guys who have good numbers. Jaden Higgins from Iowa State, 76th percentile Dominator, and shared the field with another NFL player, Jalen Noel, is going to go in the top 100. Luther Burden, there's apparently, from Missouri, there's apparently some character issues, some attitude questions. I'd seen him drop out of first-round mocks, and I couldn't understand why. Well, this might be it. 74th percentile Dominator. Trey Harris from Ole Miss, 72nd percentile. Now, Torrey Horton from Colorado State was a surprise addition to me, at least. The 10th guy in this solid third-round pick. I could see the Packers being very into Torrey Horton. 6'2.5", 196, ran 4.46. Extremely productive, return punts, which the Packers love. I think he's got more vertical ability. In fact, one of the scouts said he's got more juice than Trey Harris. I believe, if my memory serves, he scored a touchdown on Travis Hunter, who people think is a future Hall of Fame corner. Jalen Royals from Utah State, 80th percentile. Now, maybe he's a slot, maybe he's not. And then I mentioned Alec Ayumanor, 83rd percentile. He feels very Packersy as well. Third round, fourth round. Like if you could get him in the fourth and go, okay, we'll take the rest of the first 3 rounds to handle corner, interior, and exterior pass rusher. That's a pretty good plan. I was talking with our friend Jason Hirschhorn, America's Guest, that Pat Bryant not even being on this list suggests to me he could be 5th, 6th round, and the Packers could get a very, like a Dontavian Wicks kind of guy on day 3. But when you look at this group, not a lot of clean options. And so it's easy to say, well, are any of those guys really going to come in and muscle out Romeo Doubs or Dontavian Wicks or Jaden Reed? Now, you got to pay Romeo Doubs a year from now. You got to pay Christian Watson a year from now. Now, Christian Watson's coming back this season at some point. We hope, anyway. We see that this is a relatively straightforward thing. Apparently, things are going well, according to the updates we're getting from his dad, at least. But I could see the Packers saying, look, 23-54 latest. If you don't have a guy by that time, maybe you just punt. And at 54, I think it would have to be the kind of thing where, like, you got to have Jaden Higgins. it's got to be Luther Burden, someone with a very clean profile. Now they have to have, the green light on Luther Burden. We'll see what his draft stock ends up being, but there's clearly these questions about him, questions about his professionalism. Some of it I feel like is overblown, but when all of the very plugged in media guys who talk to NFL teams all of a sudden have a guy who was a consensus first round prospect no longer in the first round, my ears start to perk up. Interesting. So that could be where the Packers land, and I think it would be somewhat understandable. They need to find some speed on day 3. Again, Dante Thornton, Ayu Manor, those guys could be in the mix there. I think that's what Mecole Hardman is a little bit of a hedge against feeling like you have to do that. It's not a good receiver class. This is not the receiver class to go, yeah, you want to get that bona fide number 1 receiver. And it's really not that, unless it's Ted McMillan. Tetairoa McMillan is potentially that guy. If he starts to fall past 15, maybe the Packers pick up the phone, start to make some calls. Because he's exactly the kind of guy, boundary backside X receiver. Now he's not going to solve the vertical problem. He can win vertically, but it's mostly with size. But on 3rd and 6, that guy can get you a bucket. On 3rd and 8, that guy, even if he's covered, he's open. In the red zone, even if he's covered, he's open. And so that is an appealing part of this. This is why I continue to believe, by the way, Jaden Higgins is the cleanest receiver prospect in this class. I would use a first round pick on him. And if I were the Packers, I would try and trade out of the first round into the 30s, maybe low 40 or low 40s, like 41, 42, high in the draft round, and see if you can still get someone like Higgins or Burden, because it doesn't seem like the NFL is going to value them at the same sort of level. But that has to be because your pass rusher of choice is not there. Your cornerback of choice is not there. I want to talk about this pass rush thing with defensive tackle because it has to be weighed against Devonte Wyatt's future. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Packers. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, we got the women's games happening before the men's games later in the week. Plenty to look at. We've got 16 teams. It's happening. It's going down. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoop action all tournament long. Remember the other day we talked about defensive tackles and how if the Packers don't get one early, they may wait until day 3. The same sort of premise we used with receiver. That was the last time, in fact, we talked about that 2020 draft and the receivers. We use this same sort of context. As I watch more of these guys, these day 2 tackles, it's a long list of guys. I am struck by how many of them are one-dimensional players. And in the case of, Joshua Farmer was the example that made me think of all of this. He is a one gap. I'm going to penetrate. I'm going to shoot a gap. I'm a splash play run defender because all I want to do is get upfield and try and blow things up. And if I win as a pass rusher, I'm winning early. Arm over, swim moves, just little bap in the backfield. And he's got the burst. I think high 80s in terms of percentile on the broad jump. Didn't test awesome, but tested fine, like 71st percentile defensive tackle athlete. You have to weigh the value of that versus Devonte Wyatt. Now, the beauty of Devonte Wyatt is on that 5th-year option, it's $13 million on that 5th-year option. Well, looking at the defensive tackles around the league, Grady Jarrett just got $14 million at 32 years old. Javon Hargrave just got $15 million. Some of these older defensive tackles who, in the case of like Javon Hargrave, was not good last year, got $15 million. Jonathan Allen jettisoned, got a multi-year deal from Minnesota at $17 million for a 30-year-old defensive tackle. $13 million is not very much. That's what DJ Jones makes in Denver. DJ Reader got 11 in Detroit, and Devonte Wyatt is a premium interior pass rusher. Poona Ford got 9.2, mostly to stop the run. So if you're going to draft one of these one-dimensional pass rushers, interior pass rushers, maybe it makes more sense to just pick up the option for Devonte Wyatt and then see where it goes from there. Maybe you can get more opportunities next year. And I'm still not opposed to drafting one of these guys, because in a year, Carl Brooks' contract is going to be coming up. And so you're going to have to make those decisions. Now, he's draft class 2023. So Devonte Wyatt, that fifth-year option will be Carl Brooks' last year under contract if the Packers pick that up. Now, maybe you just say, hey, look, we'll roll this through. Devonte Wyatt, you will be the guy until we decide that you're not. You can pick up that option. My point is, you can pick up that option, and it's not particularly expensive. And I guess I didn't quite think the defensive tackle market would look like this, is the interesting part of that. Now, luckily, Carl Brooks is extremely cheap. He's $1 million on the cap in 2026. So in terms of assets allocated to that position, maybe you're getting off the Kenny Clark money. But the difference between, okay, can I reset the clock on a Devonte Wyatt type player? Sure, I could. But this is the Peter Griffin fallacy. That one-dimensional pass rusher in the draft could be anything. He could even be as good as Devonte Wyatt. And Devonte Wyatt, now $1 million is very inexpensive, but you'd rather have the good player. So this is a critical year for Wyatt, because I think Kenny Clark is going to be back to playing nose tackle. Can Wyatt materially outsnap Carl Brooks this year? And if not, what does his future look like? I do think the Packers will pick up Wyatt's option. I don't think they will pick up Quay Walker's option, but I wouldn't be surprised if we got that Jordan Love contract where it's like, hey, we're going to give you some money now, and then we're going to put money in that fifth year, basically, but it's not guaranteed the same way, or it's highly incentivized, and then there's another year on the end of that. Cost-controlled year. Now, the quarterback market is not, the linebacker market. So it was more prudent for the Packers to do that. But the linebacker market, because they benefit from the pass rusher linebacker market, which is stupid, is a significantly higher fifth-year option. So it doesn't make sense the same way to pick up the option, because you look around the market, like Quay Walker would be a top 10 highest paid linebacker. Devonte Wyatt would be like a top 30 highest paid defensive tackle. You can live with that, especially for the pass rush. You look at last year, one of the 15 best, most efficient pass rushers along the interior in the NFL last year. So what is that worth to the Packers? How do you balance what he's giving you in production versus what you could be getting from someone else? And look, I don't have a good answer for that, but this is one of those questions where we don't know what their plan is there. So it's very hard for us to project, okay, the priority set. It's the same thing at receiver. Do they want to extend Romeo Doubs? Do they think Dontavian Wicks can be the full-time backside X receiver and Romeo Doubs is your Z, and then you've got Jaden Reed in the slot? What do they think of Jaden Reed? Can he play on the outside? Would that encourage them to say, hey, you can get a Jalen Noel or a Jalen Royals and play him all over the field? We don't have that information, and so that makes the projection part of this more difficult. But it is something that the Packers are going to have to wrestle with, something that they're going to have to figure out and project forward and go, okay, we think Devonte Wyatt can be X. So then what is the value of this player with this skill set relative to what we're going to be paying Devonte Wyatt? And for a lot of these guys on day two especially, I'm looking at it going, like after TJ Sanders, I still haven't found anyone where I'm like, yeah, I really like that guy. for X, Y, and Z reasons. I just haven't really found him. And so that's like, okay, at 23 or 54, you better find that guy. Well, this is starting to sound a lot like the receiver conversation. And so when you have finite resources like the Packers do, now you have to make that trade-off. Okay? If you take Derek Harmon at 23 or Walter Nolan at 23, what are you giving up? Well, you're giving up the chance to draft a receiver that you really like who can make an impact on the team. And if you do that, now you're just going to scrape the bottom of the barrel here. Now, maybe you just hit, hey, we really like this group. We think Tucker Kraft can take a step. We think Jordan Love can elevate them. We believe in our ability as a team to draft and develop. So you hit on a day 3 guy, an Ayumanor or a Thornton or someone like that. And then you bring in a Pat Bryant to just give you depth. Geronimo Allison 2.0 with a little bit more pop. I can see it. But it's all about trade-offs. It's all about trade-offs. Now, speaking, I didn't even plan that segue like that. But speaking of trade-offs, something is happening. A marquee free agent is looking for a team like Green Bay. But the Packers would never in a million years sign him. Why? Why? That's next. Thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. In the MMQB, Albert Breer reported that one Aaron Rodgers would like a culture like Green Bay. Now, this is just, I think, negotiating through the media to say, hey, we'd like it to be Pittsburgh, but please pay us. Or it's, hey, New York, we'd really like to go to Pittsburgh. You should pay us to not do that. But it strikes me that Rodgers in 2021 was pissy about something. Coming off back-to-back 13-win seasons, coming back off an NFC championship game, when really you lost because David Bakhtiari got hurt, and you couldn't score in the second half off 3 Tom Brady interceptions. And whatever else. It was very hard in the moment to understand what he was so annoyed with. Except, if you were paying close attention, you knew it was because Rodgers wanted more control. He wanted more power. And then in 2021, he got it. The offense got worse. He got Randall Cobb. And let's call it what it was. He choked in the 2021 divisional round playoff game at home against a team he'd scored 30 points against in the regular season. And to me, that was it. Now, the Packers paid him. But a year later, he left. And a year later, he left because he was sick of the team doing what the team wanted to do and not what he wanted the team to do. But the criticism was always, well, he didn't have enough help. He went to New York and got the exact same room together. He wanted Devonte Adams. He wanted Allen Lazard. He wanted Randall Cobb. He wanted Billy Turner. He wanted Nathaniel Hackett. And the offense didn't work. Okay. So it wasn't the players. And now what you want is a culture like Green Bay, even though in the summer of honesty, in the spring of discontent, it was the culture that was rotted, that was broken. That's why you wanted heads to roll, Aaron Rodgers. The culture was rotted, according to you. No. It had to be the culture. It couldn't be that what he really wanted was more power, more control. And now we see, obviously, that what he wanted was in Green Bay to play with his players in a style that he wanted to play. He wanted the team to acquiesce to him and for that to work. And to that I say, didn't we all, Aaron? Every Packer fan wanted that to be the case. But it didn't. And it didn't in large part because of you. You wouldn't let it, or you didn't want it, or in the biggest moment, in the biggest playoff game of your career, really, if we're being honest about it, you blew it. Like, we can talk all we want about the special teams. 10 points at home against the team you scored 30 against in the regular season. Because you couldn't play the style of offense Matt LaFleur wanted you to play after 2020. No, I have to be in charge. That's what happened. And we have a long list that proves quarterbacks being GMs is a bad idea. We don't have to rehash that stuff. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was someone Patrick Mahomes wanted. Jalen Darden was someone that Tom Brady wanted. Now, Tom Brady got Rob Gronkowski, but Aaron Rodgers was not advocating for the greatest tight end in NFL history to join the team. He wanted them to re-sign A.J. Hawk. Not the same. And that's not even shaded A.J. Hawk. He's just not the greatest, tight end of all time. It's a different level. And as Tom Silverstein pointed out in the press conference that Rodgers had, where he laid out chapter and verse, all the reasons why all the reporting about what was happening was right and why he was pissed off. Tom Silverstein pointed out that almost all the players that Rodgers named that weren't re-signed, veterans that weren't re-signed, they went on to have lackluster post-Packers careers, and the Packers were right to let those guys move on. The Packers were right to not give Aaron Rodgers that power. That was the smart thing, and now he's left, and he's chasing that thing. So Packer fans who still cape up for Rodgers for whatever reason, this is what I don't understand, because you watched Aaron Rodgers throw this team under the bus, say they didn't do enough. And then when Rodgers left, he tried to recreate the Packers players that he wanted to play with, the skill position talent that you said wasn't good enough. Play with a defense that was supposed to be better than the ones he was playing with in Green Bay. That wasn't good enough. They couldn't score enough points to win. And now what he wants is the Packers culture, because the team that he built himself wasn't good enough. Well, then he had nothing to complain about. It was always about the power. It wasn't just that he wanted to win. He wanted to win his way. And he would rather have lost 2022 his way than win someone else's way. And if you can't see that at this point, your head is in the sand. You are not seeing reality clearly. This is who Aaron Rodgers is. This is who Aaron Rodgers has always been. He would rather lose playing his game than win playing someone else's. One MVP, had the greatest season of his career since 2011, and decided, I want to do less of the stuff that made me successful in 2020 and 2021. They changed the offense again because Aaron Rodgers wanted them to. That's not Jordan Love. Now, Jordan Love may not be as talented as Aaron Rodgers, may not be as good as Aaron Rodgers, but he's pretty damn good. And we're actually going to talk about Jordan Love on tomorrow's show. So follow me on all the social medias, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on all the social medias. Subscribe to the podcast on all the social medias. No, on all the podcast platforms that you use, or just the one that you use the most, Spotify, iTunes, whatever it is. Amazon. Find us there. And of course, we're on YouTube as always, so you can stay locked on Packers.